Hey everyone, just in case we're live, here we are. We are going to be starting our Thursday study in just a few minutes. Good to have everybody on. Again, we're going to just be taking some time here at the beginning to get everybody kind of oriented. We're going to be studying another I am statement of Jesus here in just a moment. If you want to have your Bibles open to John chapter 8, that's where we're going to begin. In the last 2 weeks, we've started studying the book of John and looking at Jesus when he makes these I am statements. And 2 weeks ago, we started just talking about what it means if Jesus says I am, and the personal name of the God of the Bible that we see revealed all the way back in Exodus, and that's used throughout the Old Testament and the New. The idea that this is a personal God, that it is the self-existing God, that he is not created or needing sustenance from anything else. And so when Jesus makes these I am statements, he's hearkening back to that idea that he is God. And so last week we looked at the idea when he says, I am the bread of life that came down from heaven, that fact that he's our sustenance and our source, that he gives us everything we need. And Scott and Zach and I will be talking about the idea of Jesus as the light of the world today. So again, we're going to be starting in John 8, going over into John 9. I encourage you all to have a Bible open this morning as we study together. Hopefully this is a time of encouragement. If you're seeing this live on Facebook, we certainly encourage you to participate in real time. So if you're watching this video, if you've got a comment or something you'd like to leave, we certainly encourage you to leave a comment there. We're watching here in real time. It might take us a minute to see it come through, but we would love your questions and comments, and we'll certainly try to acknowledge all of those that we get as they come in. And so if you've been studying with us, you know we sent out just a very simple worksheet on these studies that we're doing, and we just sort of start with three very simple questions about these I am statements. And the first one is really scene setting. So Scott, if you want to kind of get us started with this, the first question, and we'll kind of open it up to some other people as well to add into the comments here. But what's sort of the setting as Jesus makes this I am statement of I'm the light of the world? Again, he says it twice, so there's kind of two instances, but who's he talking to? What's going on? What's just happened? What's the stage look like when he's saying these things?
Yeah, it's an interesting time here with Jesus. So he's in Jerusalem. You have the Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Booths that's going on. It's this idea of celebrating the fact that they were wandering in the wilderness and they had to stay in tents. And so there's this feast that they had to keep, and there's a great celebration that's going on. And so in chapter 7, he talks about being the light, and he'll talk about this idea of this of the water, drawing this water. And they had a water tradition that they would do, and you can imagine Jesus is using that to make that point. And then you get into John 8, and you get this conversation about the adulterous woman. And right after that, in verse 12, you have this context. It seems that the feast is still obviously going on, but that they're lighting these lamps, which they would light in the temple courts. And they were like 75 feet tall, and you would light them at night. And there was a huge celebration. And you can imagine Jesus coming up during this time, and he's watching this go on. And he just says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. And you imagine the Pharisees, everybody's listening to what he's saying. These lights are being lit up. And so you have the first time he's going to say this, and obviously we'll come back to what he's saying. And then you go on into chapter 9, and there's a blind man. And he's going to take the time to really show the difference between the physical blindness and the spiritual blindness that they struggled with. And the context is only Jesus can is just so awesome, how he takes the moment and what's going on at the time and just makes these beautiful points, and that we can obviously learn from as we go forward. And so from a context standpoint, at least for me, I think it's important for us to understand the feast that's going on, the fact that he's talking to those in the Pharisees, and they're not very happy with some of the things he's going to say as we go forward. It is, again, as you get into verse 12, I just read, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness of it, but will have the light of life. The Pharisees say, you are testifying about yourself. Your testimony is not true. Just again, you talk about this context that they're not listening to what he's saying. They do not believe him. They're not going to follow him, obviously, at all. He goes through all of this conversation with him. And we had talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but he goes through this conversation with them. They just didn't believe him. In verse 25, they finally come on to say, who are you? Who are you? And he's going to kind of get into that a little bit from the standpoint of who he truly is. But Tyler and Zach, as we talk about this, for him just to say, I am, I am God, I am Jehovah. And the fact that now he's talking about this light conversation obviously brings up the fact that he's going to be comparing it to darkness. So what's he talking about when he's comparing this to the darkness that's around us?
So for me, I think about other places in John where light and darkness play into it. Just the contrast. Zach, you want to add that?
No, go ahead.
So again, for me, it's just this extreme contrast with the light being the source of being able to see everything else. It's the truth. It's revealing so much. I think for John as a writer, he'll lean very heavily into this theme of light and darkness by contrast. But I think about all the way at the beginning of his gospel when he starts talking in the first 9 verses about Jesus, and he describes him as the light of man. In John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And then you skip down to verse 9. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. And then the fact that the world's not going to recognize him, but those who do follow him he's going to give the right to be called the children of God. Just this idea that for me, when I read these first few verses of the Gospel of John, my mind just goes back to Genesis, where it's dark, God's there, his spirit's hovering over the waters. It's just uncreation, and the first recorded words we have of God in the Bible is "Let there be light." And so it's the first evidence of God acting and creating and influencing and making. And so for Jesus to claim himself, I am the light of the world, I am the source of light, that's a big deal. And so when you talk about, even just from a creation standpoint, light indicates the presence of God and that he's engaged. The darkness would indicate where he's not present or working. Certainly he's present there at the beginning of Genesis, but he hasn't engaged directly with it yet. And so as Jesus will talk about walking in darkness, which we can get into the idea of walking in darkness versus walking in light, you see that contrast. Hi, Karen. Good to see you. Sorry, the comment came through. Again, for those who are watching live on Facebook, we want you to ask questions, add your comments. We're going to try to include them in our discussion here. So we're watching the feed as in real time. So please leave your comments as we go through this.
Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting to me that he doesn't say, I'm the light of the Jews. It's I'm the light of the world. And so you imagine them, again, in Jerusalem, listening to him talk from the perspective of being the Messiah. People are questioning whether or not he is. And he's not talking about solely being the light for the Jews. Obviously, they're included. But just from the standpoint of him being the light of the world, he was going to open this up for everyone. And that was always his intention. This wasn't something that accidentally happened or anything to that effect, but it was something that obviously we can understand, and he was the light for us. And I think it is worth getting into in a few minutes about walking in the light versus walking in the darkness. It's whether it's Ephesians, the 4th chapter, about the darkness, whether it's 1 John talking about both the light and the darkness. And it's just it's interesting how we can kind of fall into that category. That probably flows really well with the blind man healing, but it's amazing for Jesus to be talking to them, not only to say, I'm the source of light, which he is, but he's also for the world. It's for all men. And just imagine, again, the Pharisees hearing all these things, the Jewish people hearing all these things and understanding that. And you know, Tyler, it's interesting for him to say this during the Feast of Booths anyway, from the idea for him, he was the wandering in the wilderness that they were in. He was able to take care of them, and God took care of them while he was wandering in the wilderness. And now he's saying again, I'll be this light for you. Certainly throughout the scriptures, going back to Genesis, as you did, you see this source of light that God would give them, pillar of light, all the different things that he does for them, pillar of fire, and all that he does for them throughout the scriptures when it comes to light. And the danger sometimes for us is not understanding that we are in darkness. And that's the difficulty. If it's nighttime and Jesus is talking about these lamps, certainly they were going to understand the point that he's making. But when we're talking in our time and trying to view it or make application that he's the light of the world to us, that means we have to be willing to say we have been in darkness. And sometimes that's the struggle that we can have. And that, to me, is what's so fascinating about the story of the blind man. As you get into John the 9th chapter, it's amazing to me when his disciples are asking who sinned, and Jesus answers their question in verse 3. But in verse 5, he just tells them, while I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And then he's going to heal this man. And there's amazing stories, amazing conversations that occur during this time with his parents, with the Pharisees, the concern about being kicked out of the synagogue, everything that's going on. But you just have this beautiful illustration of what it means to be able to physically see compared to being spiritually blind, and then being physically blind, being able to spiritually see. And there's just this amazing comparison. It's not the only place this does this in the scriptures, but it's an amazing comparison of what occurs here with this man. This man was blind, but by the end, he's the one that knows full well who healed him. And he's the one that's able to see what has occurred to him. Other people are going to struggle. Other people continue to struggle, even though they could physically see. But it's amazing for us that we can be in the same boat. Spiritual blindness is one of the harder things, in my opinion, to get people to see that they're struggling with. Physical blindness is no problem. Anybody can point that out, but the spiritual blindness that we can have can be so difficult. Do you have any thoughts on those things, Zach or Tyler?
No, just what you said. It takes humility and admitting that you're wrong, that you're lost, and that a lot of people won't do that.
Yeah, just to kind of expand on what Zach's saying too, the idea, Jesus and the Bible writers will continue to emphasize that idea, just with the contrast with the light and the darkness, that either, to your point, Scott, we don't know we're in darkness. So Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20 will say, woe to those who call light dark and dark light, who exchange sweet for bitter and bitter for sweet. We basically call good bad and bad good. And so people have just been conditioned and taught all their lives that this is okay, whatever this might be. And it's really, they're being deceived, and they're walking in darkness. John, early on, is in chapter 3, Jesus will use the same idea in this, again, probably the most quoted, most referenced, most well-known Bible verse in the world, in John 3:16. You keep reading on from that, though, and he does use this idea of Jesus being the light. And it makes the point that we have to understand that people are going to either love the light, even when it's harsh, or people are going to love darkness. Just looking at some of the comments that are coming in here, Bob Gallagher said, he's the word gives us the light. And so it's that idea that truth is light. And so as we read the word of truth, that's shedding light on how we see, literally, the world around us, how we see ourselves, how we see God, and the ways that we can think and process about him. Kathy Lyons here, thinking of Job when he finally sees who God is, the idea that the circumstances of our life sometimes get us so distracted. For Job, it was just trying to figure out, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And he's just asking, why is this all happening to me? And God comes in at the end of that book, and he doesn't answer Job's question, but it's the idea that he's revealed himself in some regard of, I'm in control. This is who I am. And so Job has that moment of saying, okay, I'm going to trust you, or yeah, but I still had all this bad stuff happen to me. And I think that's what you see in John chapter 3, in verse 19. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light. Why? Because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. To the point that Zach and Scott, you were both making, this takes humility, this takes vulnerability, this takes admitting, I've been wrong. And not just wrong against, I've gotten a math question on a test wrong. This is, I've created an infraction, a cosmic legal violation, a transgression against the holy creator of all things, when I turn my back on him and try to live life like he doesn't exist. That's me loving the darkness rather than the light. And so to come to the light means, yeah, I'm dirty and filthy, but that's how I also get clean. That's how I see clearly. And for the Pharisees, back in the context of John 8 and 9, they just can't get past that. They can't admit, we probably are wrong here, or at least being even willing to entertain the thought, at least on the majority. You've got certain Pharisees in the context of John 3, you've got Nicodemus, who's certainly willing to hear and listen to Jesus. So it's an individual thing that we all have to decide. Are we going to love light? Are we going to love darkness?
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I always think of Acts, the 9th chapter with Paul, when he's going to persecute Christians, the road to Damascus. He's on the way, and he can physically see, but obviously from a spiritual standpoint, he was blind. He was not doing what he needed to be doing. He didn't understand the way, as he would call it. But obviously, he's made blind. He's humbled, and everything that plays into that. And then he spiritually can see in those moments. Obviously, he's going to get his sight back, but the understanding, or how he uses the scriptures will use this blindness, and the spiritual blindness piece is powerful. At the end of this, in John the 9th chapter, you have the difference between a spiritual blind person and a somebody that can see, which is in verse 38. He finds the spirit, or the physical blind man finds him, and in verse 38 it says, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. So you have the one who has been healed and is physically now able to see, is spiritually seeing. He understands who this is. I am going to worship him. He is worthy of my worship. But you continue on here in verse 39. He says, "For the judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." And then it says, "Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said, 'We are not blind too, are we?' And Jesus said to them, 'If you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say we see, your sins remain.'" Yes, you're blind. Now, and you can take verse 40 and the Pharisees, in my perspective, I always read the Pharisees almost from a sarcastic standpoint. You're not saying that we're blind, kind of a deal. And it's interesting, his response to them, but he absolutely was telling them that they were blind. There is no question that they were blind. They were having this one in front of them that was marking off and checking off all the different prophecies of the Old Testament that were going on. People knew that he was professing to be the Messiah. He's Jehovah, all the different things that he had been saying over the time, but there was no connection that this actually could be him. They were so blind to the fact that he didn't fit their view of what it should be, or they were so blind in the fact that they were going to lose power, and they just didn't even want to think that he was the one. It's just amazing how blind they had become. And that's the danger for us, that we can fall into that exact same category. To what you were reading in John the 3rd chapter is the same thing. We can fall into that category so quickly if we're not careful. To be humble is this man understanding now that he can see, and knowing that Jesus is the one who did this for him, and now I'm going to worship him. I'm going to worship him. He's taken me out of darkness so I can walk in marvelous light. And that's the attitude certainly that we need to see. And he obviously has been said time and time again, he is the source. He is the one that we have the opportunity to worship. Over in Ephesians, the 4th chapter, Tyler and Zach, I always think about this when it talks about the Christian walk. And he talks about it from the darkness standpoint. In verse 17, beginning, he says, "So this I say, and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they have become callous, having given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness." Right? That's this darkness walk that they were caught up in. They were caught up in doing the things that they wanted to do. They become callous. They were hardened. They were ignorant to what they needed to be doing. And in verse 20, it's important for us. You did not learn Christ this way. That is not how Christ is. And so they're being told you need to make sure that you're living the life that you should be living. But this is the difference that you see for us as God's people compared to people that were walking in the darkness. And it's a powerful lesson for all of us, not just to say that we're followers of God and I'm walking in the light, but what does that actually mean? It's this opportunity for us to say, okay, am I actually humble? Am I serving him? Am I following him? or am I just pretending and I'm still walking in darkness, as certainly the Pharisees were doing? So, you guys have any thoughts?
Daniel Brewer commented, "Do you think this was a teaching moment for Jesus? He could have just said, 'Your sins are forgiven.'" So I think if I might need a little more clarity on that, Dan, if we're talking about back with, again, there's two instances where Jesus is using this statement. So there's one that follows up quickly after the beginning of John 8 with the woman caught in adultery. And I don't think that's where we're going, but just so I'm not misunderstanding that. But then obviously when you talk about the blind man, the apostles or the disciples asked who sinned. And Jesus said, it's not necessarily a matter of sin here, but with Jesus, it certainly is a teaching moment, especially I think for the Pharisees when they say, we don't have sin, we're not blind. Yeah, that is actually the blindness and the struggle we have. Scott or Zach, I don't know if if you've got any other insight into that.
Well, I was going to say that's the interesting thing of Jesus anyway. Everything's a teachable moment that he does. And you think about chapter 9, this is for his disciples. This is for the young man. This is for his parents. This is for the Pharisees that were standing there. This is for all the people that were watching. I mean, this is for us. The teachable moments that Jesus does. There's no question. It's sort of like when you get into John the 11th chapter. Could Jesus have rolled away the stone and have Lazarus come from the dead and not have anybody else involved and just do that? Absolutely. Was it a teachable moment? Absolutely. And so, to Dan's question, I think certainly if you're getting into John the 9th chapter, there's no question he could have just said your sins are forgiven or you're healed or just whatever the answer could have been from that standpoint. But it was an opportunity for him to teach multiple people on doing the exact same thing and to show, quite frankly, the discrepancy between spiritual relationship with God and just pretending to be from a standpoint of being a Jewish man in that time. You can just say that I'm a child of God. I am a follower of God. I'm from his family. Or to Jesus's point and what he's getting at, you live it and you walk in the light and you're not spiritually blind, which is certainly the struggle, obviously, to make application today. But I mean, to the question, and I don't know if you wrote anything else in, but just from the question standpoint, I think everything Jesus does is a teachable moment. Everything he does is so awesome, and there's so much to learn from every one of those opportunities that he does. Now, having said that, even from the adulterous woman, it was a teachable moment.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. He certainly could have just talked to the woman. He could have just handled the situation differently from that standpoint, but it's the same thing. It absolutely could have been absolutely was a teachable moment for a lot of people there. But again, going back to your point, Tyler, that you said earlier, and Zach, you may have as well, this is all about humility. I mean, and whether you're talking about the adulterous woman story, you're talking about the blind man, this was humility and a tremendous lesson for them to learn, and obviously for us to learn as well. So good question.
Something that I was reading in Romans this week, Romans 1:5 reads, "Through him we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith." And it continues, but that phrase, obedience to the faith, I just see when in chapter 9 of John, when Jesus makes this I am statement, I am the light of the world, and then he spits on the ground and tells this man to do it, there's some action required. He doesn't just, he certainly could just heal the sins, but then those teaching moments wouldn't have looked the same. So just that action of obedience, I think, is worth noting as well, which I know that you guys noted it, but that was just something I've been thinking about in Romans 1.
I think it's a great point. I mean, you think about John, the 9th chapter, verse 3, I kind of skipped it to verse 5, but when he's asked about why is this man blind, it says it is neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it is so that the works of God might be displayed in him. All of this has always been about to the glory of God, to bring him glory. Jesus was the same way. That was his goal, and that's what he was ultimately doing. And it's, a lot of times it's not just simply for him to be able to say it. There were a lot of people that came by and said that they were the Messiah. I'm the chosen one. What made Jesus in particular special, obviously, was that he wasn't lying. First of all, he was able to fulfill all the prophecies, and he had these miracles. So when they talk about in John 8, the fact that you are the only witness, just your words that are the witness of these things, that wasn't true. He'll go on in the Gospels, and he'll make the point of the other things that were witnesses to him. That was a big deal to them because of the Old Testament. We'll talk about 2 or 3 witnesses, and so you have that same thing going on. So he's showing that he's the Messiah, not just simply saying it. So he could have said beautiful things like he says in verses 3-5 about this blind man and what the issue was. And those are very wise words, obviously. But the fact he could heal him should have indicated to everybody that this was something special. Now, the amazing blindness comes to the fact that they caused the blind man's parents to be concerned. We're going to be kicked out of the synagogue, which was a horrible thing. So they're concerned. He's of age, go ask him. And the Pharisees, they knew he was blind. He comes up to them, was talking to them, trying to explain to them everything. The blind man kind of gets on them about, do you want to follow him too? And then the Pharisees say something that I think we have to be very, very careful of when it just comes down to the fact of saying, who are you talking to? Who do you think you're talking to? We're the Pharisees. You don't talk to us that way, blind man. And goes back to what you guys were talking about the humility. Even people that spend a lifetime reading God's word and focusing on his word have got to still be humble to understand that we can be wrong. There's a ton of things for us to continue to learn. Every time I read John 9, I see something new. It's amazing how often that happens, and it should always happen. But that's the danger sometimes for us, is that you don't take heed lest you fall. You don't realize that we certainly can become so arrogant to how far or how mature we are as a Christian and just absolutely lose it all, which is just a scary thing. Tyler?
Yeah. Sorry, I just got a couple of comments here from the Facebook feed that I wanted to acknowledge some people who are commenting. Libby Tabor commented, good reminder, this whole conversation I think she's referring to, good reminder to be authentic, not practicing fake Christianity. And again, that goes back to the whole conversation of walking. It takes humility, it takes all those things of taking Jesus at his word and trusting his authority is sufficient. We looked at Ephesians 4 earlier, where you turned to, Scott, but Libby's comment makes me think of Ephesians 5, where it talks about the different walks that we have, walking in love, walking as wise. And in the middle of those, we have walking in light. Ephesians 5, beginning in verse 3, but sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure or who is covetous, that is, an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not become partners with them, for at one time you were in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Again, that's that authentic Christianity that Libby's getting at. It's the idea that we're walking in the light, we're willing to correct ourselves, and we're willing to call sin what sin is, first and foremost in my life, and then certainly helping other people see that, you know what, I was dead. We're dead if we're not walking in the light. And that's what that last verse in verse 14 is alluding to. So it's this great opportunity we have to understand that we are walking in the sense that we can have this consistent practice or striving to act and behave and live in certain ways. And for here, it's that walking in light, walking in the truth, being mindful of everything that God has revealed through his word and living according to those things, and not participating in works of darkness where we kind of make these exceptions of, well, this is okay, or God must not really care about this aspect, where a lot of the things that people will say that about are very clearly spelled out in the New Testament. So we need to be mindful of being people of the book and going back and referring to that. Michael Hawk, one of our elders, gives us a nice little challenge here. He asks, what's your understanding of John 9:39 in view of John 12:47? And so I was looking at these a little bit earlier when you two were talking. I stopped paying attention. But just so people can kind of follow along if you're watching, John 9:39, where we read from in our story here today, Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see me may see, and those who see may become blind." So again, that whole conversation with the Pharisees, that they physically can see but spiritually are blind. The man who was spiritually blind, or who was physically blind, can now spiritually see, and then he physically sees as a result of that, of Jesus acting. And then you turn a few pages over to John 12 and verse 47. And Jesus says here, "If anyone hears my words and does not keep them, I do not judge him, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world." And again, so I'm not going to keep reading because this is going to spoil the answer. If you keep reading, this is the beauty of Bible study. If you just keep reading, you understand. Taking verses out of context can be dangerous, but understanding that if you just took these two verses in a vacuum, well, Jesus says, "I came to judge the world so that those who see, that can't see, will see, and those who see won't see, and become blind." And then here, a few chapters later, you get John recording Jesus saying, "I don't judge people." So how do we harmonize those scriptures? Is the Bible inconsistent? Is there some backtracking on Jesus saying, "Well, I didn't come to judge the world. Oh, now I'm going to judge the world"? How do we harmonize that, gentlemen, when we see these two verses together?
Well, I think you said it. You have to keep reading.
Yeah.
I think even in John, the 12th chapter, verse 46, he says, "I have come as light into the world so that everyone who believes in me will not remain in darkness." So Jesus' first intention, first goal, first desire was to save people. That was the whole purpose of him coming, was to absolutely save people, which is when, he'll kind of say that in verse 39 of John, the 9th chapter. My intention wasn't coming to divide and to cause people to lose their soul, but that's going to be the end result. That's going to happen. But his main goal is to save souls. And certainly, if you keep reading, obviously in John, the 12th chapter, as you said, you get the idea of the fact that you have a choice to make. And either you're going to reject me, which means you're rejecting the Father, or you're going to follow me, and you're going to accept what the Father says, which is what he goes on and talks about in John 12 through chapter 16, kind of a conversation. So you just have this, it's not a contradiction, it's a different point that he's making. The first one will lead to the second point, from a judgment standpoint. But the key of the purpose as to why he came was to save. He was trying to save souls. It's our choice of whether or not we're going to accept that.
Yeah, and just so if people are, I'll follow Libby's comment here. She says, "Just keep reading," and there's an emoji of a fish and a music note. So I'm assuming that's a Finding Nemo reference. Just keep reading, just keep reading. But if you again, picking up in John 12:47, where Mike alluded to, "If anyone hears my words and does not keep them, I do not judge him, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world." Verse 48, "The one who rejects me and does not receive my words has a judge. The word that I have spoken will judge him on the last day. For I have not spoken on my own authority, but the Father who sent me has himself given me a commandment, what to say and what to speak. And I know that his commandment is eternal life. What I say, therefore, I say as the Father has told me." So again, you have this idea of Jesus' purpose and intent in his ministry is to call people unto himself. It's, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. I will give you rest. My yoke is easy, my burden is light." It's this desire. It's "Come to me, accept the sacrifice that I'm going to be making." And then you've got this concept of, to what we've been talking about this morning, some people are just not going to listen to that. Jesus says, "I'm not going to judge you right now. I'm not here to execute the judgment right now. You're making choices, though, that my words are going to judge you in the last day." So it goes back to this authority conversation, the standard by which our motives and actions, everything that we say and do and think in this life, are going to come down to, did we take the time to even listen to Jesus, to open his word and study? And are we actually going to understand that? Jesus, obviously, being that Son, is subservient to the Father. He is doing what's pleasing to the Father. He's one with the Father in intent and in heart. And so this concept of, well, he's here to judge, it's the sense that he is going to set down the standard. Jesus, just by the fact that he is speaking, and again, it goes back to Bob's comment earlier, the fact that the word is speaking the word and that he's the light, the mere fact that Jesus came in the flesh and is saying things is putting constraints on us, is holding us to a standard. So when Jesus says things like love your neighbor as yourself, well, that automatically puts a standard in place. Am I going to love my neighbor? Am I not? And Jesus obviously has a lot more to say about that and so many other things. But that's why he says, it's not me who's going to judge you right now. My word's going to judge you when? On the last day. I want to give you every opportunity you have between now and then to get your life right. For the fact that we know John 12, the people that he's talking to, and both accounts all throughout John, the people that he's addressing might have been the same people that are there on Acts 2 in the day of Pentecost, part of the 3,000 souls that actually repent and are baptized and added as the first members of the New Testament church. And so appreciating that fact that that word's still going to judge them in the last day, but they were able to make a choice to admit, I've been blind, and now I see. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Son of God. He is the way and the truth and the life, the only way that we can be right with the Father.
Yeah, and that goes into all the, the different conversation we'll talk about in Matthew's account, chapter 5, where he calls us the lights of the world. And well, in order for us to be the lights of the world, we have to have a relationship with him, which is the whole purpose of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And what he's talking about there. And you get into 1 John and talks about walking in light. How we do that is John will time and time again talk about abiding. It's this in Christ conversation, this opportunity that we have to really have this relationship with him is this abiding part. So that his light, his source is in us, and we're the lights of the world. As Philippians, the 2nd chapter, will call us the stars. We're the lights that are shining out in a dark time, whether it's now, first century, whenever, when we're surrounded by sin and people that are in darkness. And that's the struggle for us. We have to make sure we have that relationship with him, first and foremost. We have to understand what that means. And then we have to be willing to show it. We have to be willing to let our light shine so people can see it. Why? To bring glory to God, which is the whole point of all of these things that Jesus will talk about, or things that we're dealing with. So we can get into the situation in John the 9th chapter and verse 38. I believe that you are the Son of God. I'm going to worship you. And so you have this worshiping piece of this blind man, or this former blind man, and he's going to worship Jesus now because he knows who he is. And it's the same for us. Are we going to be, now that we can see spiritually, we're taking out of the darkness, are we going to continue to worship him? Are we going to continue to grow? Are we going to continue to abide in him and walk in that path? Or are we just going to say it, to Libby's points and that have been made? And that's just what it comes down to. You can say it all day long. The Pharisees, they would do amazing righteous things, if you will. They could memorize various passages and do different things of the Old Testament. They knew the law, all the different parts of it, but that didn't mean they kept it. And they certainly didn't mean that they understand prophecy, and wisdom from that standpoint. And so that's the danger for us. You might be able to quote verses. You might be able to know where things are said and to know from a doctrinal standpoint various things that are talked about, but that doesn't mean you're living the life. It always reminds me of 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, about you can have all the spiritual gifts known, but if you don't have love, it's nothing. Absolutely nothing. You can be a martyr. You can die for Jesus, but if you don't have love, it's nothing. And so it's not just about saying it. It's not just about being able to quote things. It's about living it. It's about abiding in him. And that's the struggle the Pharisees had. And quite frankly, it's at least something that we need to make sure of our own lives, that we're not falling into the same situation. You guys have any other thoughts on John 9 or any other statements that have come in, Tyler?
Just Bob re-emphasizing the first chapter of John ties the light and the word together. So kind of those things we've been saying. And Libby says, hey, Adam. So I will also say, hey, Adam. Again, we're kind of winding down here, but if there are any thoughts, comments, or questions that those who are watching would like to get in here towards the end, we certainly encourage you to do that. I see Reba just signed on. So hi, Reba. Happy 1 day late belated birthday. And actually, as I'm talking here, Forrest just pasted something, and I need to open up the comments. So let me go in here. So this is what Forrest says, adding to the conversation. He says, a point on darkness. Darkness isn't always because we have sinned. The devil creates darkness and dark moments so that we will have doubts in faith and question God. And we can use the darkness. Oops, more people commenting. Sorry. And we can use that darkness, the devil's great weapon, and turn it against the devil. That is the main fruit and purpose of our good works, to turn darkness into John 9, 3-4, and give glory to him. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. So again, the conversation going back to obviously when Jesus is talking about it here, we're talking about darkness and light. Certainly, there's an understanding that sin is involved as Jesus is talking here. But to Forrest's point, sometimes when we understand just darkness as when it feels like the absence of God, when in reality he's not far away, he's close to us. But I love the point that Forrest is making here, the idea that we can take those dark situations, even the things we're going through right now when we can't meet together in person at the coffee shop like we normally would be doing this morning, and we can take that and turn it into something that shines light. The devil's going to try to use situations and try to make us practice darkness or step back into the darkness when things look dark around us, but that we have the choice to still be those lights in the midst of darkness, as you already alluded to, Scott.
Yeah, it's sort of,
so we've got that opportunity.
Even in John the 6th chapter, when they get into the boat and they're going out, and it talks about being dark and windy, and it's Jesus that comes and they accept him into the boat. Or you think about Ephesians the 5th chapter, and he talks about walking in love, walking in light, walking in wisdom, compared to the darkness that surrounds and the struggle that comes up. The temptations, so often, to your point and to what Forrest is saying, that you can focus so much, as First John will talk about, on the temporary darkness. You can focus so much on the difficulties and the struggles that are going on, and it takes you away from the light that's already shining in Jesus, the relationship that we can have with him. And that's a great temptation for a lot of people. And we've got to be very, very careful when it comes to that, of how much we focus. Not that it's not a concern, not that it's not something that takes time to focus or to think about, but the focus piece of it. Are we viewing the darkness things, the dark things that we go through in life through the prism of Jesus? Are we understanding the bigger picture of things and learning from them and continuing to let our light shine even during these difficult times? So definitely appreciate Forrest for many reasons, but certainly for the comment that he just made. And for all those that made the comments, we're going to try to do this every Thursday. Well, we're going to do this every Thursday until we get back to going back to the coffee shop, which is something we're obviously looking forward to. But it's Drew's birthday too, so happy birthday to you, Drew. But we appreciate
Happy birthday, Drew!
Everybody joining us and just, the comments you made, just please keep letting your light shine. And if you have comments after this, we can certainly talk about them next week as we go forward. But we'll pick up next week talking about the I ams of Jesus again. So definitely appreciate everybody joining us today. Say goodbye, gentlemen.
Happy birthday, Drew. See you guys.
Thank everybody for commenting.